In 2006, I signed a very lucrative contract with the Montreal Canadiens. Since then, they have been winning every game, recovering over 300,000 meals from the suites to feed the people in need in the poorest area in the city of Montreal. With the help of Pierre Boivin and the executive chef, Gilles Saint-Hilaire at the Bell Centre, we've put together a food recovery program that feeds people in need in the city of Montreal. I'm Jean-François Archambault. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a hockey player. I'm a social entrepreneur and an Ashaka Fellow dedicated to fighting hunger and food-related social issues. We'll start with a couple of ideas and then I'll go on with my presentation. Do you remember your first meal? What will your last meal look like? By the way, these are molded peas. Comes from a hospital. I won't tell you which. In both situations, when you start life, and I have two little girls that I've prepared with my wife, all the purees and homemade purees, and so you start your life with the help of your parents to feed yourself, and in the end, most of the time, you have someone helping you to feed yourself in your last days. What happens in between? What if you couldn't find anything to eat? What if you could have money, limited money, to feed yourself, but had no clue on how to cook or to prepare food for your family? Probably you would buy these things. We put together a food recovery program with chefs, cooks, and confectioners to help these chefs provide quality meals from 4-star, 5-star hotels and get this food to food shelters that feed people, thousands of people in the city of Montreal, but also everywhere in Quebec. And we're going to be starting in Vancouver, in downtown East Side, and in Calgary in the coming year. The other part of what I do is food recovery needs to be done because food banks are in shortage of food every year. You hear it. Second Harvest here in Toronto is in shortage of 20% right now of the food it had last year. And you see more and more employed people depending on food banks to feed themselves. So it's a necessity to address right now. And it's a problem that needs to be worked on right now. Now, on the other hand, I've sat on the board of the Montreal Food Bank for 2 years. And sometimes you sit on a board and you get bored. You read reports and that you mostly don't have the time to read. And so I decided to really go through these and try to understand what was happening. 40% of the people in Montreal that depend on food banks once per month. This means that they're able to go through the month, probably 3 weeks in the month, and feed their family. I don't know how, maybe struggling in the way of doing that. But then, in the 4th week, there's no more food, there's no more money, and they go to food banks and food shelters to feed themselves. A study of the health department in Quebec showed that there was a real loss in culinary skills and knowledge in less fortunate areas, and on a global basis also, more and more depending on prepared food to feed ourselves. The wheel is going very fast for everyone, and we don't take time to show our kids how to cook. What happens is with the increase of the cost of food, If you depend on prepared meals to feed yourself, and I always tell this to the teenagers that I show and that I've taught on how to cook, basically, if you buy a whole chicken, it's going to cost you less than if you buy a prepared chicken meal, because you'll have a chef doing it for you, and it'll cost you even more to feed your family. So basically, the idea of showing these kids and these teenagers, and why we would choose 12 to 17-year-old teenagers how to cook, is that in Quebec, you have more than 100,000 kids under child protection. More than 5,000 of these teenagers leave child protection at 18. The government is no longer responsible for them. So basically, these teenagers, young adults, at 18, they get out of the system and they go on the streets. They've been served in cafeterias from the youth centers if they got into a youth center at 9, it's 9 years. Being served in cafeteria, no homemade meal, no experience on how to prepare and see their family preparing a family meal. So at 18, we expect, as a society, for them to be prepared to handle buying food, preparing food, rent, job. When these kids have been beaten by their parents, they've been abandoned by society. I left home at 23 years old. I was more than prepared to leave home. My parents probably thought the same thing. I learned food through my mother, who gave me a real passion for food. I get emotional because my mom died from cancer at 49 in the year 2000. That's when I decided to start La Tablée des Chefs, the chef table. I studied in hotel management, and I always loved food. It shows. I've never lacked any food in my life. And for me, food is all about pleasure. It's all about sharing. And it really takes an important part of my life. So when I studied in hotel management, I noticed that there was a lot of food that we were preparing in our class. We were about 20 students, and there was we were cooking for about 80 people to practice. And we would eat, and we would taste, and we would give our opinion on the food that we were preparing. And we would rotate to different stations and do everything. And so there's so much you can eat. So when you're 20 and you're making food for 80, you take 2 plates and then you're through. So the rest of the food was being thrown in the garbage, which didn't make sense to me. My father taught me that there was people in need very young, so I couldn't understand why that food was going to waste. So basically, trying to understand, my father was the legal advisor to all the chefs in Quebec. So basically, I was following him in conventions and going into kitchens and discover a real passion for chefs. By the way, I'm not a chef. I'm a passionate cook, but I've never ran a kitchen. With all due respect to the chefs that dedicate their lives to feeding people and with passion, sometimes leaving their family aside. A lot of broken families in this industry. So basically, the idea was to take this opportunity into the industry. So I started working in the hotel industry as a salesperson, but then I went into a banquet department, my nose in the kitchen, to see the food and everything. And I saw in the industry tons of food being thrown away. In 2000, I decided to leave for Tremblant to live the experience and work for Fairmont Hotels and Resort. And I see the same thing. I meet the chef, I see the same thing. And I started working there and learning that on May 28th of 2000, my mom lost a fight of 10 years to cancer. And for me, the idea of recovering the food from the hotel industry to feed the people in need was really an idea at this time. And when you're young, you think that you're waiting for the right moment to start a project. You're waiting for everything to be in place. You're waiting for the puzzle to be all together before you start. And you're scared of rejection, you're scared of obstacles, you're scared to face challenges. And so you're waiting for the right time, you're waiting for the right opportunity to start the project and get the idea, and you're waiting for everybody to say, yes, I want to join. Well, guess what? It doesn't happen like this. And it took my mother's death to make me realize that you have to live every day to the fullest. And when you have an idea, you have to make it happen now. Because tomorrow, you don't decide what happens. So, if you guys have an idea, don't wait. Struggle. Go through challenges. It'll form your character. And you'll become passionate people even more. And basically, the idea of succeeding builds up. And through 10 years of work, it leads me here, talking to you guys about this. Right now, we're recovering over 400,000 meals every year only in Quebec. Can you imagine what we can do in the rest of Canada with all the food? I presented this project in Miami 2 days ago with the hope of scaling up this project throughout North America, South America, and Central America. Basically speaking with Starwood Hotels that have the potential to scaling up this project to 300 hotels, bringing 3 million meals to people in need across the Americas. On the other hand, we're giving 40,000 hours of cooking lessons and cooking workshops to kids from youth centers all across Quebec to prepare these teenagers that will be facing these responsibilities on how to become responsible in terms of feeding themselves, knowing how to make simple recipes and not take for granted the preparation of food. Stop going to buy hot dogs and junk food. Preparing a soup, a simple soup. Basically, for me, starting this project, when my mother died, was an acceleration of wanting things to be different. And in 2006, I decided to leave my career in the hotel industry. I was director of sales and marketing for Marriott Hotels in Quebec. I had a very good job. I was making money, almost $100,000 a year. And I decided to quit and launch this project, the Chef Table, La Tablée des Chefs, full-time. I don't regret anything. Now we have 2 cooking schools, and we reach teenagers across the province of Quebec, but the idea is to scale up this project. And really, basically, what I think, food has the greatest power. To give you an example, we have these kids that have never gained self-esteem. Like I said, they've been beaten by their parents, most of the time abandoned at 10, 11. We can't imagine this until we see it, and until we feel it, and until we live it. When you have Frederick, a little boy, 17-year-old, big boy, saying that through our program, he basically learned how to cook with pleasure. So through culinary summer camps, you guys can go through what we do on the web and learn a little bit more about what we do. But this kid, he impressed me so much. He went on stage just right after I gave a speech to business people talking about what we do to get some money to help us out. He goes on stage. I don't know his story. And he tells that by 7-year-old, 8-year-old, he was preparing his own meals just to survive. His mom was locking him up in his bedroom at the age of 4. At the age of 9, the mother is no longer present. She's drugged up, she's doing prostitution, and this little boy is now in charge of himself, and Child Protection gets him on board. They try to help him out. They find the dad who's left a long time ago. Now he wants to take him over. So he comes back into his life just to beat him up with a baseball bat. And he tells that story to the business people. You couldn't hear anything in the room. People were so captivated by and touched by what he was saying. And then he said, through these workshops, I've learned how to cook with pleasure. And when you are able to link food with pleasure for these teenagers that have never been told that they're doing good and that they can be good at something, we're talking about talent, it's all that matters. In half an hour, you can show a recipe to a teenager that thinks that's not good at anything. And in half hour, even if he wants to miss the recipe, he can't. Simple recipes can be shown to anybody without failing. And in half hour, he gets that cookie sheet out of the oven, and he takes a bite of his own cookies. And he gets a smile on his face. That is very powerful. So food and cooking can get these teenagers out of trouble. And that little boy, Fred, he wants to become a chef now. So the only thing I can do is help him out. Thank you very much.